up, y'all? This is John and Mike back for another episode of the Nothing Finer podcast. Once again, live on Millions and now on the Fans First Sports Network as well. Tonight we are talking to Matt Tamanini. We'll ask because you know we like to pronounce names correctly on this show. Of the Land Grant Holy Land podcast. That's a mouthful. To talk about the state of the Ohio State program. I'm pretty excited about this. I know we talk a ton of shit about Ohio State, but that's just, I feel like they do it to themselves with keeping Ryan Day as the head coach. But as you've seen by now, this episode is called Fear and Loathing in Columbus. And I thought of this name for this episode watching the Missouri and Ohio State game back in January. So it's just a matter of finding someone with Ohio State that was willing to come on and talk to us. So now that we've got that, we're pretty excited. But before we get into it, how's your weekend? What are you drinking?
Weekend was good. We celebrated my youngest son's birthday. He's turning 7. Well, he turned 7 on Wednesday of this week, but we had the time now, so we got an inflatable for him and stuff like that. Um, just pretty low key weekend. Nothing too crazy. Just kind of lounging around. Um, I'm just drinking water. I had enough of the tequila and stuff last week, so no, I'm good. I'm gonna try to dry out before we have our little Connect Savannah open bar deal in a couple weeks. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
take
That's
it
a
easy.
good point. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
How about
man,
you?
I literally played in a disc golf tournament every day between Thursday and today. I
Mm-hmm.
played in 4 tournaments. Yesterday's was 2 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my shoulders from wearing cutoff t-shirts are as red as this Braves jersey I'm wearing. And I drank a lot of beer over the last few days, and um, somebody would bring an old milk jug full of a mixed drink to pour out to everybody. That's just kind of how things are done on
Ooh,
Tybee.
brought out the fucking jungle juice.
Yeah, so
Yeah, buddy.
I also need to give my liver a break for a minute. But no, man, had a great time. I learned that if you go swimming in one of the creeks on Tybee, you will just smell like shit for multiple days. Um,
I believe it.
yeah, and the oddest thing, my hands. Wash my hands all the time. Probably 10, 12 times a day. They smell the worst. I got in the water on Friday, took a shower Friday night, Saturday night, washing my hands all day between Friday night and today. Hands still smell bad. It's kind of weird.
Hmm.
Yeah, is what it is. I'm excited about this episode, though. I know we've been behind the scenes. Me and you have been working on trying to get this together for a while now. Um, so we're both pretty excited. Matt will be joining us here in a minute. Do you
Yeah,
want?
and Matt's a part of the Fans First podcast network as well, so made it easy.
Yes, technically colleagues. We couldn't run away from us for too long, like the other Ohio State podcasts we've reached out to.
Mm.
Um, one of which has read our message that I sent before the Peach Bowl 2 years ago and still not responded. Um,
Mm.
so that's just interesting. No shade at them. They are a significantly larger podcast than us. I get it.
Yeah.
Um, do you want to talk about the draft here or wait until the end?
We can do it real quick as we're waiting, and then we can finish up if we get started earlier.
All right. So biggest shock around one. A lot of you guys listen to this. If you still follow the Falcons, I'm sorry. Um, they paid Kirk Cousins a lot of money to just draft a quarterback in the top 10 with Michael Penix Jr. And I think Michael Penix is a great quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, African American left-handed quarterback in Atlanta normally does well. Throwing it back to
Well,
Michael Vick.
I was gonna say it's the Michael part that raises some concerns.
Well, ooh, Michael and a left-handed African American quarterback in Atlanta. What the
Surely,
numbers is he
surely that
wearing?
will. What's that?
If he gets number 7, we could be cooking
Let's
with something.
go.
We could be
Let's.
just hopefully he likes dogs. Just just throwing it out there.
Well, he was a dog out there in Washington.
That's true. That's true. Um, I do think it's interesting that allegedly Minnesota got baited into trading up for JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, he would have
Um,
definitely been there.
well,
Well, yeah.
apparently Sean Payton was calling around to all the teams that he knew Minnesota was going to call, saying he wanted to trade up to draft JJ. So when Minnesota called, he thought they were fighting the Broncos when the Broncos really wanted Bo Nix the whole time.
And they smashed. You know what? I'll be the first one to say I was wrong about there only being 4.5, quarterbacks taken in that first round. There were six.
Yeah,
So definitely, I was
six,
very wrong.
6 in the first 12 picks.
Yeah.
That was pretty nuts.
Well, then there was none on day two. So like rounds 2 and 3, no quarterbacks were taken. For like
Yeah,
the second time in the common era or something like that, whatever that means, like what 67 or whatever year the common era for whatever network I saw that on starts.
yeah. Brock to the Raiders at 13. If the Raiders have a good quarterback, they could potentially make a run this year. Their defense is solid. Now they have Brock.
Mm.
They're really just a decent quarterback away from making the wild card. They're obviously probably not going to push the Chiefs out of the West. It just is a factor of the division they play in. Um, and then I feel like the Bengals were just gifted Amarius Mims at 18.
Yes, they needed offensive line help in the worst way because like Joe Burrow's been getting killed the last couple years, so they needed something.
Yeah, and they got the most athletic offensive lineman at 18, and everything I've heard is people are just like, how did a Georgia player once again fall to a team that is probably making the playoffs without this player and just got better?
Right. Hmm.
Day two is where a ton of guys went off the board higher. Well, Ladd a little bit lower, but everybody else higher than expected. Ladd at 34 to the Chargers, so he can get overthrown by Justin Herbert. Um, Kamari Lassiter to Houston. They were a secondary away from having a deeper run in the playoffs in the last year, so
Hmm.
love that spot for him. Um, AD Mitchell gets to get the ball overthrown by Anthony Richardson and then
Or
block for
whoever,
him to
or
run
whoever
inside.
their, I would say, or whoever their backup is when Anthony Richardson inevitably gets hurt and misses the rest of the season because he doesn't know how to slide.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, man, Javon Bullard to Green Bay is just another one of those the rich get richer kind of things.
Yeah.
Dropping that far and then going to a team who made the playoffs last year, won a game in the playoffs last year, and just added to that secondary. Love that.
Hmm.
Jermaine Burton gets to be the sixth wide receiver on the depth chart in Cincinnati. So, special teamer for sure. For sure.
Hmm.
He has a tendency to blindside people. So, if one of these teams has a woman on the field, Jermaine's going for it. Done. Better not have a female kicker if you're playing Jermaine Burton. She'll get laid out.
He'll see red. Yeah. Hopefully they did their homework on that and they just don't have any women that get on the field at all.
Blake Corum to the Rams at 83. I want to say that's higher than he was projected to go, but a great spot for him. I mean, the Rams
Yeah.
are set up for success.
Hmm.
Tyke Smith to Tampa. I, I'm not upset with where. I don't think I'm upset with where any Georgia player went. Shockingly,
No.
I think Tyke Smith. I mean, going to a team that made the playoffs last year, won their division, going to be able to bolster that secondary after they had a couple of losses. And I said it during the season. He's one of those guys that is going to get overlooked and then get into camp, and a few days in, they're just going to be like, "All right, dude, you're on the team. You can
Yeah.
go chill out for a minute."
Hmm.
Ray Davis to Buffalo, great pick there. Going with James Cook power guy. Cedric Van Pran to Buffalo, great
Man,
spot.
Buffalo's getting some players, man.
Not any wide receivers. That's
No,
a little concerning.
yeah,
Spencer Rattler to the Saints.
I like that. I like that a
I
lot.
I like that a lot. If their offensive line improves just a little bit, man, you're talking Spencer Rattler could start for the Saints for a decade. I really think
Yeah,
that. And I think it's weird that one of the things that a lot of GMs talked about is they couldn't get the QB1 documentary out of the back of their head when it came to Spencer Rattler.
I was just gonna say that. That boy, that guy was what? He was 17 when that came out, and that's gonna impact his draft stock 6 years later.
Yeah, that's pretty brutal. I mean,
Great, it's crazy. Yeah,
he was a dick in the
he
shoe.
was. He was a big doucher for sure, but that sucks for him because by all accounts he was not that way in Columbia.
No, by all accounts, he wasn't that way the second his second year in Oklahoma, and then he was an entirely different person when he got humbled, went to South Carolina. I
Mhm.
mean, I think he's going to do great.
Yeah,
Everything I've read and heard about him is that he's a great guy now. So, man, I there are very few teams where you think, what in the actual fuck were they doing this year? I feel like.
yeah.
Um,
Besides Atlanta.
I was about to say Atlanta's the biggest one,
Mhm.
100%. Um, but Jordan Travis to the Jets, interesting. Um, I guess the Jets just do not like quarterbacks with strong lower bodies. Just kind of weird to pick another guy with a weak lower body. Odd,
Mhm.
whatever. He was more relevant than the projections, not as relevant as the College Football Playoff Committee suggested.
No.
And the last dog drafted was Zion Logue at 197 to Atlanta. This is the first time I can remember they took a Georgia player. Kind of weird that they needed pass rush help and took an interior defensive lineman, but Falcon stands for fans always left counting on next season, so just kind of is what it is there.
No, for sure. Sorry, I was trying to. Matt was having some problems getting in. I was trying to send him an invite again.
I gotcha. I think I put the email in correctly, um,
Matt.
but man, I don't read well. I went to Georgia public schools.
No, it's all good. Um, all right, I sent it to him again. Okay.
But we had Dejan Edwards signed with Pittsburgh as an undrafted free agent. And then Kendall went back to hang out with half of the team that won two national championships in Philly. I think that is a great spot for him. And then Marcus Rosemary Jack Saint signed with. I had it pulled up just a second ago.
The commies, right?
Yes, the commies. Um, that's a little tough, but at least he has Jaden Daniels to throw to him now.
Hmm.
So
There is that. Yeah.
Jaden Daniels has the ability to raise the floor of any team he plays with.
Hmm. Yeah. Shoot, without him, LSU would have been in deep, deep trouble.
Hey Matt, can you hear us?
Yeah, I got you. How are you?
Doing all right. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Thanks for having me.
No,
Thanks
thanks
for
for coming
coming
on, man.
on. First question: how do you pronounce your last name?
Who knows? My grandparents said it differently from each other. So Tamanini, Tamanini, either one is fine.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Something that you guys in the Big Ten will learn here quickly. CBS will make you pull out all of your hair by pronouncing the easiest names wrong every single time.
I don't
Yeah.
have any
Um,
hair, so I'm well ahead of you. So
oh,
I'm not that far
there
behind
you
you.
go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So all good,
um,
all good.
yeah, CBS broadcast. It'll drive you nuts. They
I,
don't know. They
I
don't know how to pronounce John Doe.
I'm of the opinion that every broadcast sucks. That there's like two or three good announcing teams in all of college football, and that's about it. So
Is
maybe that.
Is Joe Klatt and what's his face one of
No,
them? Okay, that's what I thought.
no,
Yeah.
I no, I do not like them. I'll take the only ones I like on Fox are is it Jason Benetti and Brock Heward. I like
Yeah.
them.
Mhm.
That's about it. There's one of the ESPN crews, Mark something or other, and oh gosh, it's a guy who I consider more of an NFL guy. I can't remember, but most of them are terrible. So
Yeah.
I would do quite fine with never having to listen to Gus and Joel ever again. But
There you go.
that's just me.
I'm the same way. Gus is
Yeah.
by far
Yeah,
my least favorite sports broadcaster of anything. His voice just drives me insane.
yeah. It's both of those guys like to be the center of attention, and that's not what I need from a broadcasting team.
Yeah. Agreed.
I will go ahead and warn you off the top. We talk shit. So if you ever feel like we're talking a little too much shit, let us know. We are prone to be assholes
Okay.
every now and then. Um,
I
we don't
I
intend to
lived
be.
I lived in Cherokee County for about 7 or 8 years, just north of Atlanta.
Oh,
So
yeah.
well familiar with the trash talking from Bulldogs fans.
It's funny. I actually before John and I both live in Savannah now, but I before we moved here, I taught middle school in Cherokee County for 4 or 5 years. So yeah,
Oh, okay. Very cool.
yeah,
Um, so we do want to say before we get to potentially talking some shit, we did recently do a 21st Century Blue Bloods episode where we put tiers of teams for the 21st century because, in our opinion, college football has changed so much since the year
Yeah,
2000. I mean, if you're talking about a school that beat hardware stores in the 30s and 40s, yeah, it means nothing to me.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but Ohio State was in the second tier, right below Alabama, and Alabama was by themselves just because of
Makes
Saban.
sense. I think that's very
Um,
fair. Yeah.
yeah.
but yeah, so we will probably sound like haters, but we do
It's all right.
respect the program. We just, it's mainly Ryan Day, if we're being honest.
Okay, let's get
Well,
into it because if you I know in the notes you put you saw the article I wrote
yeah,
after the Cotton Bowl. So I am not a homer for Ryan Day as a football coach. I think he's a great guy. But beyond that, there's plenty of things that he needs to atone for.
He,
yeah,
I mean, he does a lot of charity. He keeps Just for Men in business
Yeah,
by himself with his beard.
he does. He does. I mean, he really actually does do. He's his father died by suicide, so he does a lot for mental health.
Oh,
So
that's
like
awesome.
it's tough to get really upset with a guy who like is out there doing a lot of mental health and suicide prevention stuff outside of football. So it's like it's hard to hate him. But man, after the last couple seasons, I think a lot of people in Columbus have gotten pretty close. So
yeah. And before we get into that too much, again, just for the record, I grew up in Michigan. I mean, like
I
Michigan's
see the
like my
shirt.
second
Yeah, I see
team.
the
Yeah,
Detroit shirt. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So all good.
So yeah, there's plenty of things I could say. I grew up hating Ohio State, obviously, and the last few years have been great for me as a Georgia alum
Yeah,
and a Michigan fan growing up. It's been great. So
yeah. Totally
I'm not ready
understand.
for that to go on much much longer for Michigan being Ohio State, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. All good. But look, I'm a big believer in sports hate. Like I'm somebody who I grew up in Columbus. My parents were Ohio State grads. I'm an Ohio State grad. Like it's like I can sports hate a lot of things. I don't care enough. Like I think there's much bigger things in the world to like actually truly hate other schools. But
Yeah,
you put it in the context of sports, I'm all for all of the shit talking and all of that. So
yeah,
there you won't have a problem here. And
sweet,
I'll dish it back where appropriate.
Awesome.
perfect.
Mike, you want to go for the first question?
All right, so you can see by my background, this is obviously
Yeah.
that was at the top of my mind. So let's get it out of the way before we get to 2024 Ohio State. Was the hit on Marvin Harrison Jr. targeting?
I mean, you're asking me. Of course, I'm going to say yes. I mean,
Yeah,
but I mean, let's be honest. Like, I don't know you guys very well, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you are like me, and I don't actually know what the hell targeting is. I mean, I think most of the broadcasters that call college football games don't know what the hell targeting is. It's the exact same with like, what is a catch in the NFL? I don't know. It, if it happens to Ohio State, in my opinion, it's targeting. If Ohio State does it to someone else, I don't believe it's targeting. So beyond that, like I don't know. I mean, like
yeah,
it
yeah,
looks like it looks like I mean, to be in all honesty, I went back and watched it again just to refresh my memory. Like, depending on the angle you see it in, like you could say that it's shoulder to shoulder, and then at a different angle you could say, oh well, it's helmet to helmet. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, when it comes down to it, whatever happened, I personally, you're not going to convince me that that hit didn't change the game. You can say, I don't know that if it was called a penalty that they would have scored. Ohio State's run offense, they would have been inside the 5 on that. I'm not sure Ohio State's offense could have punched it in from there because the running game in that season was awful. But moving forward, because that happened at the end of the third quarter, the rest of that game was impacted by Marvin Harrison Jr. not being in the game. So that play changed the course of that game and the season. Because honestly, I think that was the national championship game. I mean, most people
Yeah.
can agree to that. So whether or not the penalty changed the game, I don't know. But the play certainly changed the game as far as I'm concerned, and really cost Ohio State the national championship as far as I'm concerned.
And
Yeah.
that is 100% fair, and we talked about it pretty much immediately afterwards. CJ Stroud should have been the number one overall pick after that. Bryce Young, don't care. I said it before the draft last year. I was the team thinks Bryce Young is going to be looking for another quarterback in 3 years because he can't take a hit. And CJ Stroud took dozens of hits in that game, played his ass
Yeah.
off, did literally everything physically possible to win that game, and they just didn't. And then we saw that last year in the NFL with leading a team that barely won games the season before to the playoffs. So that
Yeah.
ton of respect for
The,
him in that game.
Mhm.
the thing that I think people don't recognize with CJ Stroud, or at least didn't when he came out, is that you guys know this too, because Ohio State is where it is in terms of like the recruiting rankings and all of those things. Like you just assume that it's just a bunch of guys who are great athletes making plays. And that is of course true. And that's true at Georgia, it's true at Alabama, it's true at all of these top tier teams. But what I think people didn't recognize with CJ Stroud is just how cerebral he was in being able to read defenses and get the ball in the right spot. And when you're playing teams like Rutgers and Northwestern and Michigan State in the Big Ten, it doesn't really matter. Like he didn't need to do all of that. But when he got to the Texans and was able to kind of show that against NFL caliber athletes and NFL caliber coaches, that really kind of uh, came to light in a way that I think other than the really entrenched Ohio State fans were able to realize. And look, we're happy for him. I mean, it's great to finally have an Ohio State quarterback in the NFL who, is probably going to be there for more than a couple of seasons. And uh, he's a guy that coming off of Justin Fields, who's someone you guys know really well, it could have been very easy for Ohio State to kind of regress back to what they had done under uh, Urban Meyer, which was a lot of like run first quarterbacks. And to his credit, Ryan Day went out and found a guy who at least maintained the high level that Justin Fields had, if not elevated it a little bit as well.
So after the Cotton Bowl loss to Missouri, you wrote a piece about major changes that Ryan Day needed to make, most of which were related to play calling and the coaching staff. So what was Ryan Day's approval rating immediately after those back-to-back losses?
For me, it was at like a -6 because these were things these you saw that article. Stayed up till like 2 in the morning after that game writing that article. It's like 3,300 words. But these weren't new things. These weren't new
Yep.
complaints. I'd been arguing about him. I'm of the opinion that no head coach should be a play caller on either side of the ball. Maybe if they're just transitioning from a coordinator position, you give them a couple years to get their feet wet and be able to turn that over. Ryan Day was well beyond that statute of limitations as far as I was concerned. The coaching staff had gotten stale, and to be quite honest with you, I maybe this will endear me to you guys who listen before. I am not an Urban Meyer fan. I didn't like him when they hired him. I mean, I respected the fact that he, elevated the level of play and brought a national championship to Columbus, but I didn't really like him. I don't like him as a guy. I don't like him as a coach. And in the back half of his tenure in Columbus, he got very lazy and complacent in terms of his coaching staff. He hired his son-in-law. He hired the guy who was the best man at his wedding. And his son-in-law ended up doing a fairly decent job. He was actually just not retained this season as a quarterbacks coach, but he brought in Bill Davis as the linebacker coach, and he was atrocious. And Zach Smith, who was Urban Meyer's mentor's grandson, Earl Bruce's grandson, he ended up bringing a whole lot of issues to the program. And it felt very similar to what Ryan Day was doing here because and you guys might disagree with him. I think Ryan Day is a genuinely good guy. I also feel like he's a guy who doesn't like to make people angry or hurt people's feelings. And he was keeping guys on the staff for longer than their expiration date. And I, like you said in that article, I talked about play calling. He found a way to give up play calling. I talked about coaching staff. Pretty much everything in that article that I suggested ended up happening. It wasn't all by choice, because some of those guys that left, at least especially one of them, went to Michigan. Tony Alford. I wanted to see him leave too. That wasn't Ryan Day choice. So I'm not saying like, oh, he looked at my article and did everything I said. That's not what happened. But by hook or by crook, like a lot of these things happened, including when it comes to transfer portal and stuff like that, which had not been a major focus for the program and still isn't. And we can get to that. I think you want to talk about that, but like, coming out of that game, there were still some people who thought that we at Land Grant Holy Land were too hard on Ryan Day, which, to be quite honest with you, we're kind of the black sheep of the Ohio State blogosphere. A lot of the more beat sites that cover them on a daily basis are a lot kinder and a lot more forgiving. We tend not to be. So I mean, Kirk Herbstreit, despite the fact that I was his intern when I was in college, and despite the fact that he's done our podcast annually for like 4 years, he blocked us this season on social media because he didn't think we were being nice enough to Ohio State, which, like, that's not my job. My job is to comment on what we see, and whatever. But the point is, there were still some people that were standing for Ryan Day. But I think the level-headed fans can look at the program and say, yes, they won 11 games this season. But there was so much more meat left on that bone that had they been better at roster management, if they had been better on the recruiting trail, if they'd been better with coaching staff, if they'd been better at play calling, those are things that aren't on the players. So, like, I don't really blame the players a whole lot for the last couple seasons. I mean, you can nitpick here and there individual decisions, but on the whole, to me, these are Ryan Day's failures, and then by extension, his coaching staff's failures. So, if you're looking at the totality of Buckeye Nation, I mean, maybe pushing 33%. That's changed since they had a kind of a historic January, but coming out of that Cotton Bowl, I mean, it was pretty bad. It was honestly about as low as I can remember in my 40 years of Ohio State fandom.
I remember like Maurice Clarett just going off during the Michigan game, but then also I think in the Missouri game as well. I'm like, wow.
Right. Look, I was a senior at Ohio State his freshman year for most seniors. That's the other one national championship, beat Miami. I know Maurice Clarett has a lot of issues in his past. I want him on Ohio State's coaching staff. I don't think that'll ever happen. And I don't necessarily even mean as like a running backs coach, but like give him some sort of analyst or QC role, because like you said, he's not afraid to like be honest. And while we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, behind closed doors at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, very few people are willing to talk that way in public, whether that is the coaches or the Buckeye beat. So to have that voice was refreshing, and so I'm always for mostly opening up his mouth and saying whatever is in his head, because I generally agree with 95% of it.
Yeah. So was it fair to place such a large amount of blame on Kyle McCord for the Michigan loss?
I don't, like I said earlier, like, I don't really blame him for the Michigan loss. I don't think he was a great quarterback. Like, I mean, I think if you blame him, it's just like he wasn't Justin Fields or CJ Stroud. Like that.
How many people are? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like that's the blame that he gets as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he was only 18 of 30, but he had 271 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. He did throw 2 picks, and the last one was the essential game clincher. So like, if you're gonna say he wasn't, it's weird to say that you had back-to-back generational talents at quarterback, because by definition you can't have back-to-back generational quarterbacks. But like, he wasn't as good as them. So yes, that's a step down. The problem is that the offensive line was terrible. And really, you can't have an above average quarterback. And he's above average. Like, he's not a terrible quarterback. Like, if you look at his numbers are still pretty good. But you can't expect an above average quarterback to do, to win a game on his own against an incredibly good defense with an offensive line that doesn't give him any time. If you look at the rushing yards for Ohio State, like, they didn't have they had like 100 rushing yards on, as I'm looking at the stats, 28 carries. You can't go 28 carries for 107 rushing yards and expect to win a game against a defense like Michigan's. So again, I am not angry that Kyle McCord left, but I certainly don't put the onus of the failure against Michigan on his shoulders.
Yeah.
So Ohio State hit the portal really hard this year, getting Julian Sayin, Caleb Downs, Quinshot Judkins, and Will Howard, just to name a few. So is there any read on who's probably QB1 after the spring?
No. And the only reason I say no is because there's none coming from Columbus. I think looking at the fact that Will Howard was brought in and he only has 1 year of eligibility left, and I guess technically he could re-enter the portal by the end of Monday. I don't know when this is going to air, but like I guess he could leave. But I don't see them bringing in a guy who has won a conference title at a Power Five conference with no eligibility left, and him not starting. Um, I think that they certainly would have liked to have seen him win it in the spring, but I don't think that's happened either from how they're talking about it or from the limited practice availability in the spring game that the media sees. I don't know what it's like at Georgia, but like media doesn't see a whole lot of spring practice at Ohio State. And I know that some programs like basically open it all to everybody. That's not the way it's done in Columbus. So like we didn't see a ton, but I don't think there's any reason to be like, yes, Will Howard is head and shoulders above Devin Brown, but they're just not saying it. I don't think that's the case. I think it's pretty close, but I would be shocked if it's not Will Howard taking the first snap on whatever August 29th, whenever their first game is.
Yeah. So do you think Ohio State will place as much of emphasis and financial resources on the transfer portal going forward, or is this more like I don't want to call it a panic move, but I don't know, kind of more or less was, I think, just kind of going
Yeah.
radically different than what he had been doing, his whole
Well,
head coach career.
yeah, I mean, I said earlier, like the transfer portal has never been a huge focus for Ryan Day at Ohio State. But in all honesty, like you kind of rattled off the four big names that they got in the portal, they only got six. So it's not like
Yeah.
they're redoing their entire roster. Like Ole Miss had 18, Texas A&M had 27, Colorado had 34, South Carolina had 20. Ohio State got six. It just so happened that four of them are fairly big names, and obviously you get the number one quarterback in the actual current 2024 class to flip after he'd already been on campus. That's a weird situation only because Nick Saban retired. Otherwise, that doesn't happen. Same thing with Caleb Downs. He's not leaving Tuscaloosa if Saban is retired. And it came down to Ohio State and Alabama in his initial recruiting. Obviously, in the transfer, came down to Ohio State and Georgia. So I think you have to in this day and age, like you have to be willing to adapt to what's going on. To be quite honest with you, like the transfer portal could look very different like next fall, let alone next January, because of all of the changes that are happening. But I think you have to kind of go at it and be willing to bring guys in. The one that really surprised folks was Julian Sand because Ohio State did have a not a five-star, but a top 50 quarterback already in the class in Aaron Nolan. And people just kind of assumed that the way that Ohio State has operated under Ryan Day is that like Aaron Nolan was an early commit. He had stuck with Ohio State. He was never one of those his other visits and was really nervous about potentially flipping. He was really loyal to Ohio State, and that type of loyalty has always been rewarded under Ryan Day. So it was a little bit of a surprise when the rumors started coming out that Julian Sand was interested in Ohio State, and even more so when he actually came. So I think that Julian Sand appears to be a superior quarterback to Aaron Nolan, but they're both true freshmen, so who knows? That one was the real difference maker. I think that showed kind of how Ryan Day had changed his philosophy. And he had to. You said you didn't want to call it a panic move. Look, I'm of the opinion that, you know, I don't think that Ryan Day should be fired at any point in the past few years, or should have been fired in the past few years. But he's pretty damn close. Like, I mean, I don't think you can continue to do the types of things that he has done in the past few seasons. We can get into that a little bit more and not expect some sort of consequences at a place like Ohio State. It's going to be significantly different now with the expanded college football playoff and the expanded Big Ten. Those expectations are going to have to change a little bit, but I think that Ohio State will still continue to be judicious in the transfer portal, but they will take their shots when they are available. I don't expect them to ever do what some of those other teams I talked about were, and like getting 12, 20, 34 guys in the transfer portal, because they're not going to need to. Same reason, like Georgia, you guys had 8. Like, they're just not going to need as many spots because of how well they do in the traditional recruiting. But if they see guys like Quinshot Judkins, who was, an SEC first team running back who wants to come, like, it's hard to say no. And if you're able to do that, and the first couple years of the NIL era, Ohio State kind of lagged behind. It wasn't organized. The athletic director at the time, he's still the athletic director until July, technically. Like, he was of the opinion that, like, let's wait and see what the NCAA does. Let's hold back. Let's not do anything that could get us in trouble. And then we realized, like, it's the Wild West. No one's getting in trouble for anything. So you've got to go out and do it. And, like Georgia, Ohio State has a huge fan base, has a huge alumni base, has a huge booster organization, and they have to take advantage of that. And I think they're finally doing that. They might be a year or two too late, and it might have changed something that had happened in the previous 2 seasons, but at least they've got it figured out heading into 2024.
I did think of a question while we were going through that part that's not in here.
Yeah,
Ohio
go for
State
it.
self-reported tampering violations.
Yes.
Is there any indication on which player it was?
I I don't think there's been anything official. I believe it was Caleb Downs. But what that tampering violation technically was it was either a tweet or a text message. I think it was a tweet, but I don't quote me on that. That like after it was announced that he's going to be entering the portal, so one of the coaches, and it might even have been a support staffer, was like, "Congratulations," but he hadn't yet technically entered the portal. So it was something that was like, okay, whatever. I mean, I think we all understand like what is technically tampering probably doesn't actually happen all that often. But things that are really tampering, even if they don't fit the definition of the word, are happening all the time. A lot of the times these guys go into the portal and they commit somewhere the next day. That didn't happen in 24 hours. Even if
Right.
the school wasn't directly talking to the player, things are happening behind the scenes, especially when these players now can have agents. The agents are doing a lot of the work behind the scenes. So look, if that stuff's happening, like I think that's a legitimate tampering concern. Someone sending a tweet saying congratulations, like I'm not worried about it. And again, I might get some of those details wrong. So if you want to fact check me on that, please feel free. But like it was a fairly low level thing. There isn't expected to be any kind of ramifications to that moving forward.
It's definitely not as severe as hamburgers. That's a death penalty.
But here's the thing: it's like Ohio State understands, like with the whole tattoo gate situation that happened with
Yeah.
Jim Tressel, that essentially got Jim Tressel, he technically resigned, but he was fired. The NCAA rules are stupid.
Yep.
The whole hamburger thing is stupid. I go back to like Rick Majerus got in trouble because like he lived in a hotel after his wife died, and he had a recruit come to the hotel where he lived, and he bought him a hamburger at the restaurant in the hotel. If
Yeah.
that recruit had gone to the house that he lived in and Ramirez had paid for a hamburger and cooked it and gave it to him, it would not be a violation. So the NCAA rules are stupid. But in terms of this recruiting thing with hamburgers, it's the same thing that got Jim Tressel in trouble. It was not cooperating or lying or whatever. In Jim Tressel's case, it was lying about it. So like the NCAA rules are stupid. I think that the hamburger thing, the thing that I like about it is just that it's funny because
Yes.
Harbaugh doesn't do anything that's not funny.
Yeah.
Like that's why I mean, look, I don't love the fact that he beat Ohio State the last 3 years, but I'm genuinely sad that he's not in the Big Ten anymore because he's just so weird that it's always entertaining.
Yeah.
Like everything he does is entertaining. He's just a weird dude, and I don't think like that. You're a Michigan fan. Like I don't think that's controversial. At least
No.
I don't.
No,
I mean,
we knew what we were getting into when he signed
yeah,
years ago. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, he played Screech Powers' cousin on Saved by the
Yeah.
Bell. Like that's weird. Now, granted,
Yeah.
I'm a diehard Saved by the Bell fan, but like he's just weird. So
Yeah.
the hamburger thing, you throw in the fact that he loves milk and all of that stuff. It's just
Milk and
it's
steak.
just funny. Yeah, it's just funny.
Yeah. And you can't eat chicken, it's nervous for that too.
Right, exactly. Like if it would have been even funnier if it was like a turkey burger or something. That's the only way that could have been funnier.
All right. So 2024, what will it look like, or what will a successful season look like next year for Ohio State? Like, what do they need to do to be successful, I should say?
I it's tough to say because like there's so many variables that can happen this season. But I think looking at it now, at the end of April, after spring practice, what like 4 months before the season started, I mean, it's 4 months until they play their first game because it's before Labor Day this year. They have to beat Michigan. Like Ohio State can't in today's day and age lose 4 consecutively to Michigan, especially when, no offense, it looks like Michigan's going to be down this year because of everything that happened in terms of the roster. I mean, even if Harbaugh had still been there, like they were so veteran heavy last season, and guys not only veteran heavy but like 6th-year COVID guys. So like it's tough to replace that because the roster took such a big hit, because so many of the coaches left and did so late in the game that I mean, quite honestly, I'm sure Teron Moore didn't necessarily get the picks that he would necessarily have liked, especially because he went out and tried to get some guys that didn't end up happening. So like, I feel like this is a season where you have to get the win in the rivalry game at the end of the season.
It's Columbus too, so you have to do
It's in
that.
Columbus. Exactly. Like you can't lose 4 in a row. We can't go back to a John Cooper situation where you're losing 10 out of 12. Like that's just not going to be acceptable in today's day and age because, like you guys said at the beginning, the 21st century college football is just different than it was when that was happening. But it is also different when it comes to the college football playoff. Like, I don't think just get like I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I think Georgia and Ohio State and a few other teams, like if they don't make the college football playoff in a 12 team and then an additional 14 playoff, like that would boggle my mind. Like I think Ohio State is going to be in. I think Georgia is going to be in. There are just teams who are going to be in every year. So that's not as much of the litmus test anymore. I think it has to be getting to the 4. Like you have to assume that like a successful season is getting to the semifinals. And of course, like I said, things can happen. There can be injuries, crazy stuff that might derail that where you can give people a pass. But like all things being level and everything going at least somewhat normally, like, there's always injuries, there's always weird things. But like short of something catastrophic, you have to beat Michigan and you have to make the college football playoffs.
I know we're like on our time here, but I just thought
Yeah,
of
no,
one
whatever.
question. So I'm pretty sure I heard it somewhere. I can't remember where it was at, but someone had brought up the idea that Ohio State, if they were to host a home playoff game, they wouldn't do it in the shoe, like they
Yeah,
do it in like Indianapolis. Like, is
yeah.
that a thing?
That the person who said that is the Ohio State outgoing athletic director, Gene Smith,
Mm,
and the reason for that is because like, it gets really cold, and
yeah.
we saw what happens in in the Midwest in a really cold game, and those things aren't great. I think that the fan response to that was so over the top that they might have reconsidered that
Okay.
because like you, it's been a thing for Midwestern teams, and I don't want to just say Big Ten because it's also true for for some Pac-12 and schools like that in the Great Plains, and even ACC teams from the North. It's always considered somewhat of a disadvantage or a home field advantage in bowl games for ACC and SEC teams, even some Pac-12 teams, because they're playing in not only closer quarters to where they're from, but like in better weather that they are used to. For the back half of a Big Ten season, it gets pretty nasty outside. So if you're having the home field advantage of hosting a game, you should take advantage of that home field advantage. It is something. I mean, we saw it in the NFL when the Miami Dolphins went to Kansas City, and they just looked like a pee wee team. It was horrible. So, like, if you're going to get the benefit of hosting one of those early round playoff games, you should take advantage of it. It might not be the prettiest football, but I would much rather have Ohio State playing against just a theoretical Georgia in you know sub freezing weather than being in the Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. So I think that this new AD Ross Bjork, who came from Texas A&M, which is a whole other thing that I don't know how I feel about it yet. I think he kind of understands that a little bit better than Gene Smith did. So I hope that does not happen if Ohio State does in the future host a playoff game.
So, should catastrophe happen and Ohio State loses Michigan for the fourth year in a row, Ryan Day gets fired, who do you want to see the next head coach? The list that Mike put here: Jim Tressel, Urban, Mike Vrabel, Brady Hoke, Luke Fickell, or Jimbo Fisher. You can choose someone not on that list.
First off, he threw Brady Hoke in there just to be an asshole, which I totally appreciate. But the only guy on that list that I would have any interest in is Mike Vrabel. I made my thoughts about Urban Meyer very clear earlier. Jim Tressel, 71 years old. I would not have minded him coming in and being on the support staff for Ryan Day. And he kind of has been a mentor in this offseason now that he has retired from being the president of Youngstown State. He has kind of been in his ear, and Day's talked about it quite a bit, actually. But none of those other guys interest me in the least. I think Mike Vrabel, well, first, we'll go back to Ryan Day. I'm of the opinion, and maybe you guys feel the same way about Georgia, that I don't think that Ohio State in football or men's and women's basketball needs to be a place for people to have their first jobs as a head coach. And Ohio State did with Ryan Day. They just did it with John Diebler, with Jake Diebler. Sorry, not John Diebler. Jake Diebler as the head men's basketball coach. That was another weird situation. Not exactly the same as Ryan Day, but not completely dissimilar either. And I like Jake Diebler, and I think he'll do a good job. But I think that because of what's at stake in terms of how much money is invested in these programs and what the expectations are from the fan base, it's never good to have a first-time head coach. I just don't think it's smart. Ryan Day has gone through some significant growing pains in his first 5 seasons, and I think he's starting to learn some of those lessons a little more slowly than I would have liked. So all these guys are current or previous head coaches, so that's not going to be an issue here. But none of them interest me other than Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel is a Buckeye, so we are weird when it comes to coaches. Like, we like them to have some sort of Ohio connection. He's a former Buckeye. He's also coached at Ohio State. He's also coached in the NFL, gotten a team pretty close to a Super Bowl. Like, he's a guy who gets it. He also didn't love recruiting when he was at Ohio State. Like, that wasn't something that he really enjoyed, but as a head coach, you're kind of like the closer anyway. So I don't know that'll be an issue. And to be honest with you, like, I don't know if it's not a Mike Vrabel. Like, I don't know who would even be an option or really be someone that I would be excited about. Just because, like we said, you want somebody who has Ohio connections, not just because of like the recruiting impact. Like, you can say, oh, I'm from here. I know these guys. I know these high school coaches. But like, there's pride in Ohio State's program, like there is with Georgia, like there is with Alabama, like there is with Michigan. Like, you want somebody who understands what that means, who doesn't have to get caught up on the history, doesn't have to get caught up on the rivalries, doesn't have to get caught up into who the people are. So like, I think it's important, but like outside of Mike Vrabel, there's guys like Matt Campbell was always a guy that people talked about because he is from Ohio, he's coached in Ohio. He's not super interesting to me, so I don't know. Like, I mean, I hope that it doesn't come to this. Honestly, like, that's my thing. Like, I hope we don't have to have this conversation. But I will say, like, Mike Vrabel could have been coaching someone this year. Yeah. He chose not to. He chose to be like an analyst or an advisor for the Browns so he could stay close. You're not going to convince me that he didn't do that because he wanted to see what happened with Ryan Day this year. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that he would take this job if offered. And if Day does end up leaving, I hope they offer it.
And like what you're saying with like first year coaches, I mean, we had that with Kirby. I mean, granted, he played at Georgia, he's a Georgia guy, yeah. But it took him a while to kind of grow into it. I mean, I know they got to the national championship his second year in the program, but I mean, there was definitely growing pains with him.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same with Ohio State. Yeah, it was the same with Ohio State getting there in 2020 against Alabama. Yeah. But that was the COVID year, so things were weird. Like, going into that game, like, I didn't think Ohio State had a shot. I mean, even before half their offensive line ended up having COVID and not playing. So like, even beyond that, like, I didn't go into that game thinking like, oh yeah, Ohio State's got a shot in this game. And that's what's so weird about college football is it's like talent takes you really far in college football because of how many teams there are. If you are able to get enough of it, you can overcome a lot of coaching issues. It's not the same in the NFL. Like, everybody's got relatively equal talent, but coaching is such a big deal. So like, I agree with you. Like, whether it's Kirby or Ryan Day, like, it takes time, and that's why I hope that he has crossed over to the other side of that, and that he's ready to cook because he's got the pieces this year, and if he's able to actually let his mentor Chip Kelly call plays, that's great. I'm all for it, and hopefully it has the desired result. Like I said, I don't think you need to say it's national championship or bust. There will be people in the Buckeye Nation who say that, but there needs to be progress made from what we've seen in the past few seasons.
Is there anything else that you'd like to hit on while we got you here?
Let's see. We could really get into the Caleb Downs transfer recruitment if we wanted to, because like that was bonkers. Like I don't know how closely you guys were. Like, I mean, we were getting. So I don't know if you guys do. Like, there's a couple beat writers that do like a text message service where they send out things they hear that they can't really report otherwise. Like we had heard that they took him to an apartment and said like this is going to be your apartment. Like it was a done deal. Then the next thing we heard is he was coming to Ohio State. That was not one that I expected. Even though he had been really close to me to Ohio State out of high school, like I wasn't expecting them to get him because of the coaching move where very similarly Ron is coach from Alabama. It didn't happen, but like that was a shock to me. Was it as much of a shock to you guys as it was to us?
Don, you remember where he played? He played Grayson, didn't he?
So you lived in the Atlanta area for a while. You know where Gwinnett County is. Gwinnett County is a black hole of talent for college football, and less than 1% of those talented players play at Georgia.
Yeah. And there was something about like they didn't really recruit his brother, so that's why he didn't consider Georgia in the first place.
So I think that's part of it, but I mean, I think a big part of it is how transient Gwinnett County is. So there's no home tide love there. You have a lot of those high school coaches wanted to play for Georgia and didn't get recruited, whether it was in the 90s or under Mark Richt. Yep. And now, like, there's schools that Kirby Smart cannot go to visit kids because high school coaches hate Georgia so much. So it's a very, very odd situation in Gwinnett County. I honestly think the program they'll put a little bit of effort into it, but there's certain schools where they're like, we got no shot.
Yeah. He went to Mill Creek for the record.
Which is a fairly new school, isn't it?
Tell my age a little bit here. It was built when I was in middle school.
Okay, so not new. I was thinking like in the past 5 or maybe in the past 10 years.
No, there is one with like a creek name that's only about 10, 12 years old. I don't know. No. But yeah, Gwinnett County's weird, man. Every time I see a town player in Gwinnett County, I'm just like, oh, cool, he's going to go play for Bama. It just kind of is what it is.
You know what's funny? Since we have you here, the whole Dylan Raiola saga. When he transferred, when he moved from Arizona to Gwinnett County, they played at Buford, yeah, another black hole that like Georgia doesn't get guys out of.
Private, they can recruit.
Yeah, they all across. Like it's a state and national power. When he went there, like, oh, we're gonna finally break the curse of like Buford guys like not coming here, and then he obviously went to Nebraska, but then we got
his teammate from Buford that flipped as soon as Dylan Raiola flipped, and all the rumors that fly around Georgia circles by people that are around the Buford program say that none of his teammates really liked him. So,
yeah, I look. Between Dylan Raiola and Quinn Ewers, Ohio State's had a very interesting relationship with landing the number one quarterback in classes. And so it's very weird to like be on the opposite side of that with Julian Sand, where he was the number one guy and he flipped to us after Quinn came for one season, which was just purely about NIL money, because if he'd stayed in Texas, he couldn't have gotten NIL. It was against the law there at the time. And he came to Ohio State and flipped back, and then Dylan committed to Ohio State and then going to Georgia, and then now being at Nebraska. It's just wild. I mean, I am somebody who's of the opinion that I want the players to get as much money as you can, get it however you can. I don't care. Go wherever you want. I have no problem with transfers. Like none of that stuff bothers me. But it is wild. Like, I mean, it does make things more interesting. It can make things a little bit more frustrating. I'm completely in favor of them doing it, but it does change the way that you look at recruits, at commitment, at players on your roster. It is a much different world from, I don't know how old you guys are, but from, I'm assuming when we were all in school, like it's just a different world in college football than it was a generation ago.
Yeah, that was when Ohio State won that game against Miami for the national championship. So
yeah, we're about the same age then. Yeah.
It's one of those things where we don't even talk a lot of high school recruiting as much as we used to, because you'll have a guy that commits to Georgia, and then just for example, Ohio State's like, oh, dude, we got $1.5 million for you to come here. And then he flips his recruitment, and then 2 weeks later, he's like, "Oh, dude, Colorado's offering a Lamborghini, so I'm going there." So it's too much of a roller coaster. There's so much other stuff to talk about. High school recruiting it's just part of it now.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, like I think a lot of the NIL stuff is probably blown out of proportion in terms of how much it matters. Just because, like, I think kids are at that age are fairly mercurial as it is, and they're going to change their minds anyways. And I think a lot of people are using NIL as a crutch to explain why someone leaves their school or why they don't get somebody. You know, Ohio State can do it too. It's like anytime someone goes to Miami, oh, it's the bag man giving them money. Like, okay, maybe, but like that's not any different. Like, so I don't want to blame NIL on anything, because I think it's, like I said, I'm totally fine with players getting money however they can, because it's been over a century of them being exploited by billion-dollar company and not having the opportunity to do that. So I'm fine with that, but it's just crazy the fact that we have to talk about collectives, which I think it's insane that this system is basically asking for fans to pay for the players when the schools are still the ones making billions of dollars or millions of dollars on their TV deals. It's insane to me that that's the way that we have landed on this. And we're just like, okay, this is what we got to do now. Instead of the schools being the ones to, like, the Big Ten has like a $7 billion contract with their latest media rights, and they're still nickel and diming fans to pay for NIL stuff. It's dumb. It's just dumb. The whole system is dumb. I don't have a better answer. I certainly don't have a better way to do this other than the people who are paid to have better answers need to figure it out.
Yeah. And it's not the NCAA. I mean, federal court told them to sit down and shut up because he didn't do it early enough.
Right, but that's the thing. It is the NCAA because they didn't do this. They didn't take care of it when they should have. They should have seen this coming decades ago, and they didn't, because the NCAA is a completely ineffectual organization. So, then of course, if you're going to have the federal government try to be the organization that comes up with a solution, you're up shit creek there.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like the blind leading the blind here. So,
All right, well, we really appreciate coming on and talking to us.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll do it again when Georgia and Ohio State are meeting for a game at some point late this season.
National championship. National championship.
There we go. I'm here for it.
Now, on the record, look, I'll bring it down here. I dropped it. Never mind. Florida has sports gambling now. They just finally did. I live in Florida. Finally got sports gambling. So I put my $100 on Ohio State to win the national championship just because I'm a sucker. But I will very gladly see that win happen over Georgia if we can do this again.
And Georgia it's actually getting on the ballot in November to have sports gambling be legal. So you know, if you want to put it out for any of your listeners that are in Georgia, we need all the help we can. I'm tired of using third world countries gambling site. I want to actually lose my money to Americans for once.
We're driving in Jacksonville for us because it's 2 hours away.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing here in Florida. It was never on the ballot. It was the Seminole Nation said we can do whatever we want, so we're going to do it.
And they're doing it like Hard Rock, right? Like
yeah, because they own the Hard Rocks here in Florida. So the ones in Hollywood and Tampa are both owned by the Seminole Nation. So look, let's do it. Bring it. I'm not a huge sports gambler, but if I can donate $100 to them to put a little extra cash on Ohio State, I'm all for it.
There we go.
Once again, thank you for coming on and talking to us, and have a good one.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You guys are over there.
Okay, we're going to close out the episode with a few things and then get rolling.
Cool. All right, I appreciate it, guys. Have a good one. Let me know when this is out, and we'll send it out to all of our folks, too.
All right, appreciate it.
Yeah, usually put out Monday, yeah.
So, great. I look forward to it. Have a good day, guys. You too.
All right, once again, want to thank you for coming on and talking to us. You guys got, because I'm not going to edit that out, y'all got a little bit of behind the scenes of what happens with pretty much every guest we talk to. It's just weird trying to close something out. I don't know of anyone that's done it well without a lot of post editing, and I'm tired. It's going to be late by the time we're done here. I'm not going to edit
it. Yeah. A little peel behind the onion.
But if you haven't already, follow us on social media: Instagram at nothing.finder.pod, Twitter at finderpod, Facebook and YouTube. Just search us there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. TikTok is Nothing Finder Podcast? ? I get it wrong every week. Cool.
No, that's it.
This time. But as always, guys, remember there is nothing finer in the land
than a drunk, obnoxious Georgia fan.
Cool. When I end this stream, I am gonna go change shirts.
Okay.
Something that's not a hot ass baseball jersey on my sunburn, and get some more water.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'm in the bathroom too. All right, cool.
All right.